Hey everybody, Father John Muir here. Welcome to Catholic Breakfast. One of the things that I find a lot in my life as a pastor of a Catholic parish is how Catholics can oftentimes feel extremely exasperated and frustrated by the battles in the increasingly polarized culture in which we live, between left and right, between liberal and conservative. And that's what I want to address in this episode. The other day at the parish, St. Thomas Aquinas, where I am, a woman came up to me and told me that her grown daughter won't speak with her. And I said, well, why not? And she said, because she's a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, and she's so mad at me for being a Republican. And I thought, God, that's really, really sad. And what struck me as she was telling me that another parishioner a few weeks before had told me the exact same thing, only the other way around. So that can be extremely frustrating thing. And I want to take a look at how we, as Catholics, we have incredible resources to help with this. And this is not just true in the wider political realm in the country in which we live, but it's also true in the life of the church, isn't it? Catholics can be really at each other's throats over different issues. I think lately we've seen this with issues around, for example, the COVID-19 virus, where people have very different solutions, and then there can be a real breakdown of relationships over that, and good solutions aren't arrived at sometimes, or they're not agreed upon, or there's just a lot of conflict. Same thing certainly is happening now with the social unrest around the issues like Black Lives Matter, the killing of George Floyd, and a lot of different conversations in that area. And sometimes Catholics feel they're not sure how to approach that without simply just getting polarized like the rest of the culture. Well, I'm happy to report there's actually a lot that the church has to say, and we won't be answering all those questions now in this short video, but I think we can make some headway in terms of some basic principles and perspective on how to make sense about this. So let's dive in. I'm going to grab my handy dandy dry erase board with big, awesome, huge pieces of paper. Now, when we say left, right, liberal, or conservative, let's just take a little bit about one way to kind of overgeneralize that, just to help us for the sake of this video. Here we got the left, here we've got the right. And these are two basic categories that are typically in play anytime human beings are doing anything in any organized way. The left here is where you get novelty, new ideas, updating things. The right, a more conservative approach, will tend to focus on stability. Now, you want things to stay the same to some degree, you want things to change to some degree. The left will tend to focus on how hierarchies can corrupt, and when they corrupt, they tend to disordinately help people at the top and disordinately hurt people at the bottom, whereas a right or a more conservative approach will tend to focus on how good hierarchies are. Hey, this structure, this organization, it's helping us. It's a source of good things. The right will focus, therefore, on competence. And do you like the fact that I wasn't competent enough to spell the word competence? Okay. Anyway, hierarchies aren't just about power, they're about competence. It could be a hierarchy of a baseball team, or an economy, or a family, or the church, or a school. Every hierarchy will have certain values at the top, and that allows, and people move up the hierarchy through competence. You develop certain skills and virtues which allow you to move up the hierarchy. The right will tend to focus on the goodness of those virtues and which makes a person competent. The left will tend to focus on those who are disenfranchised, who may or may not have those virtues or those competencies, but nonetheless are disenfranchised and either can't get into the structure or the system, the organization, or are pushed out of it from the get-go. The right will tend to focus, therefore, on the responsibility of the individual. Hey, you're in the hierarchy, it's a stable thing, and you can figure it out and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take responsibility for your life, and you'll be rewarded and blessed for it. Whereas the left will tend to focus on the autonomy of the individual. Why? Because oftentimes the hierarchy is not respecting that this person has basic freedom. They're being forced to have things happen to them that they don't want. The right will tend to focus on the way that the hierarchy, if competent and functioning well and not too corrupt, will generate good things. It could be an economy, it could be food, but it could also be other things as well. It could be knowledge in an academic environment. It could be love in a family environment. The left will tend to focus not on the generation of goods, but the distribution of goods. How are we getting these good things to people? That's very helpful too when you've got people who are disenfranchised, who can't get access to good things, and the left is very conscious of how these things are being distributed. Lastly, the right will tend to focus on justice because a corrupt hierarchy will not be just, but a stable, good hierarchy will tend to get the competent people the rewards for the good things that they're doing. It'll reward good things, it'll punish bad things. That's just. The left will tend to focus on mercy. Why? Because the hierarchy will always have some element in which it's not functioning properly. The system isn't working well to some degree, and therefore mercy is going to be required. Mercy to forgive the people who are messing it up, and mercy for those who are being disenfranchised by it. I realize that all sounds really abstract. But the point is just to kind of lay this out, because what I want you to see first and foremost is that whether or not someone tends to see the world through this lens of a left-leaning, more liberal approach, or this right-leaning or more conservative approach, right off the bat, I hope you can see that this is not a question of a simplistic good or bad. Because as I think any rational person can see, and as a Catholic should see as well, hopefully Catholics are rational people, that you need both of these functioning on some level at all time. The question is, in what way? In any given situation, what needs to happen? Do we need to keep things basically the same because it's functioning well enough? Or is the situation getting corrupt enough that we need some novelty to make sure that it doesn't collapse or fall apart or hurt people? Now you may be wondering, okay, who cares? Well, let me answer that right now. So I'm going to draw on a document by Pope John Paul II. It's called Centesimus Annus. It was on the 100th year anniversary of Pope Leo XIII's amazing encyclical Rerum Novarum on the new things. Both of those papal encyclicals really speak about society and the church's ability to speak into social problems. So here's Pope John Paul II. It goes without saying that part of the responsibility of pastors is to give careful consideration to current events in order to discern the new requirements of evangelization. However, such an analysis is not meant to pass definitive judgments, since this does not fall per se within the magisterium's specific domain. Pastors, priests, bishops, and popes, it's part of their responsibility to consider what's happening in the culture and then to make a contribution, to provide insight there, but it's not part of the official magisterium to make definitive pronouncements on certain social things. So the other day, a woman called me up and went on a long rant about all the social problems happening in the world and how frustrated she is about all of it. And then I said, thank you for sharing all that. What would you like me to say? And she said, I want to know where you stand on every single one of these things. And of course, she wasn't familiar with Centesimus Annus because it's not the official job of a priest as a priest or a pastor as a pastor to make, or even a pope, to make definitive judgments on political or social issues where there's room for prudential judgments. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that the church just drifts into the background. John Paul II again. The church, in fact, has something to say about specific human situations, both individual and communal, national and international. She formulates a genuine doctrine for these situations, a corpus, that means a body, right? A corpus which enables her to analyze social realities, to make judgments about them, and to indicate directions to be taken for the just resolution of the problems involved. So think about it from this perspective. What's the church? It's the body of Christ. What's the body of Christ? Well, it's the way in which Christ now is operating in the world. Who is Christ? He's the Son of God. What does it mean to say Son of God? It means to say God himself. What does it mean to say God? It means to say the creator of every facet of reality. Therefore, Christ always has something to say. He cares about every aspect of the world. Economy, yeah. Politics, yes. Ethics, yes. That doesn't mean a theocracy. That doesn't mean that politics and these other areas, economics, don't have their own areas of expertise. But the Lord contains all these things underneath his purview. And therefore, the church can speak into these things by analyzing social doctrines, making judgments about them, and indicating directions to be taken. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with that today because we tend to associate religion or Catholicism with sort of a private affair, private spirituality, a kind of emotional therapy or something. Authentic religion in the Catholic Church involves all of creation and especially the good of the human person. Is the church in providing solutions to help make sense out of these things and navigate complex social and cultural questions? So as the church engages in these social and cultural questions, which can be very complex, is she simply acting as a kind of social worker? Not at all. Listen here to John Paul II quoting Pope Leo XIII. As in the days of Pope Leo XIII, this doctrine, now when he says this doctrine, he means the whole corpus of the church's social doctrine, is still suitable for indicating the right way to respond to the great challenges of today, when ideologies are being increasingly discredited. Now, as then, we need to repeat that there can be, listen to this, there can be no genuine solution to the social question apart from the gospel, and that the new things can find in the gospel the context for their correct judgment and the proper moral perspective for judgment on them. That's a mouthful. Now, a few things there. When he says ideologies are being increasingly discredited, one way to look at that is, what's an ideology? It's when your logos is based on an idea, right? Ideological. So it means that the way I make sense or rationalize all of the world is through an idea. And it's typically, I think, an idea from over here or an idea from over here. I see the whole world through this lens. So this is all I care about, because this is the idea that I'm seeing the whole world through, or this is the idea that I see the world through. And you can tell someone is an ideologue or under the influence of an ideology when they only have one half of the story. It's why often a conservative ideologue thinks that a liberal ideologue is completely out of her mind, or why a liberal ideologue thinks that a conservative person is a monster because they are under a sway of an ideology. They can't have both aspects of reality and of human organization functioning at the same time. Now, what about the gospel? When Pope John Paul II here says, to help navigate these social questions, the church cannot answer these things, cannot analyze the situation, they cannot provide direction apart from the gospel. Does that mean that every single thing has a kind of religious answer? It's not that simple. What's the gospel? It's the good news. What's the good news? It's the good news of the whole event of Jesus Christ, that God became one of us, became a human being, and through his death and resurrection, he set human beings free from all that hinders our perfection and has drawn us into a share in divine life. He's drawn us into the very community of God, and that perfects human beings and human communities. You think, okay, that's a nice religious thing to say, but what does it have to do with this? It has a lot to do with it. It has to do with what is at the center of all of Catholic social doctrine. Pope Leo XIII calls it the thread. The thread is the dignity of the human person, created in the image and likeness of God and created for union with God. That's unique to the human being. That is a kind of stance of faith. You can't reason to that in some simple way. It's a kind of axiom from the Judeo-Christian worldview, that human beings have this unique dignity because they're created by God and they're created for God. That means that we take that thread, and it's not just picking or choosing. As we look at issues of should something stay the same or change, is this hierarchy working or is it corrupt? Should we be looking at who's disenfranchised or where the competencies are? Should we be looking at responsibility or autonomy? Should we be looking at the generation of goods or the distribution of goods? Is this a question of justice or mercy? We're always taking the thread of the dignity of the human person and asking the question, is this uplifting the dignity of the human person? Is it promoting the dignity of the human person, both as an individual and as someone who's called to a community? Is that a simple solution for cultural, economic, and social problems? No, but it does provide a kind of a baseline. That baseline, which is illuminated by the gospel, leads to some very practical principles that can help make sense out of these two poles. Let me read to you again here, John Paul II. Again, we're doing Centesimus Annus. He's speaking about the solutions that the church indicates in certain social situations. Leo XIII is repeating an elementary principle of sound political organization, namely, and here comes an affirmation of something over here. The more that individuals are defenseless within a given society, the more they require the care and concern of others, and in particular, the intervention of government authority. So that's the principle of, and I'm going to turn my page here, solidarity. So in the state has a responsibility for taking care of the defenseless, the poor, the unborn, etc. Why? Because of that thread of the dignity of the human person. Here, that's where the church would support, like in an economic question, a certain level of regulation of the economy, at least in an indirect way, certain moral or ethical norms that regulate the economy so that there's solidarity for the defenseless. I know what you're thinking. If you are concerned about what's on the right side of this, you say, whoa, 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 whoa. So the church is promoting socialism or Marxism? Not at all. Let me go back to John Paul II and Pope Leo XIII. If Pope Leo XIII calls upon the state to remedy the condition of the poor in accordance with justice, he does so because of his timely awareness that the state has the duty of watching over the common good and of ensuring that every sector of social life, not excluding the economic ones, contributes to achieving that good, while respecting the rightful autonomy of each sector. So that's all on the left stuff that we've just been looking at. He's affirming the goodness of those things, insofar as it's connected to the dignity of the human person. But watch how careful the church is here. This should not, however, lead us to think that Pope Leo expected the state to solve every social problem. On the contrary, he frequently insists on necessary limits to the state's intervention and on its instrumental character, inasmuch as the individual, the family, and society are prior to the state, and inasmuch as the state exists in order to protect their rights and not stifle them. So, I know that's a mouthful, but what he's getting at there, what he'll eventually call the principle of subsidiarity, which means that individuals are called to responsibility, and the state can't take away their responsibility. That part of human dignity isn't just being protected and being given certain things you need to live. It's also the dignity of moving up hierarchies, in achieving competencies and things, in being not just autonomous, but responsible. And that requires the state actually stepping back and letting things unfold, letting human beings make mistakes and do things and achieve. This is where we get, for example, the right to private property. And where the church, John Paul II especially, supports what he called not so much capitalism as he called a free market economy. Because here you have individuals governing what's happening on the ground through their own competencies, not the state stepping in and controlling every aspect of it. On this side, that's why you'll tend to see the church also like to see things like intermediary groups and associations, things like workers' movements. And how about the family as an intermediary between the individual and the state? All these are forms of subsidiarity. But let me give you some practical things to do you can apply to multiple situations. The first I would say, everybody, is seek to understand and affirm the other side. Whether it's a family member, it's a fellow Catholic, it's someone who's maybe very different from you in your outlook on the world. If you're really frustrated, you're really exasperated, you're really angry, it's possible that you're not seeking, or that other person isn't seeking to understand the legitimate values on the other side of the left-right divide. And what you can certainly do is seek to understand those and affirm them. hey, it sounds like you're really concerned about the overstep of the state into this economic question. Yeah, I am worried about that. Gotcha. I can affirm that. Hey, it sounds like you're really, really concerned about that the immigrant is going to be ground under the wheel of this economy and they're not going to get just wages. Yes, I am concerned about that. Right? You can affirm that. Right? That can at least help to build some common ground, and it can decrease some of the emotions that can sometimes drive people apart. It's also helpful to remember that the person you're talking to might be crazy, but they also might just be concerned about complementary values that you're concerned about. That doesn't mean that sometimes people aren't dead wrong. Sometimes they are. But this is a way of making progress in the conversation to legitimate understanding and maybe even legitimate directions. Secondly, watch out, beware of ideology. What's an ideology? It's where you're only telling one side of the story. It's where you're only promoting one side, either the left or the right, liberal or conservative. You're all for one. Everything on one side is good and everything on the other side is bad. That's really dangerous because life is just not that simple. The Catholic Church doesn't fall into an ideology on one side or the other, but rather she stands above it with this rich social doctrine and helps us to navigate the complexities of social, cultural, and economic situations. And then finally, I would say, as you're going through conversations or thinking through difficult issues, find and protect the thread. So you feel like you're lost in a confusing thing, or you watch too much cable news network, and you're just so frustrated. What I want you to do is look for the thread of where is the dignity of the human person in this. Is it being protected? Is it being encouraged? Is it being lifted up? Is it being encouraged to flourish? Find that thread and then protect it in whatever area of life the discussion is focusing on. So these 3 practical tips: seek to understand and affirm the other side, beware of one-sided ideologies, and then find and protect that key fundamental thread of the dignity of the human person. Thinking might not necessarily go perfectly, but it may help quite a bit. What I think this is important for is it keeps us from falling into what you might call tribalism. Tribalism is where my group of who is my people gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then the group of who those bad people are gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That's actually pretty dangerous because you stop to communicate with a lot of people, and then when you can't communicate with people, things can get violent and bad quick. Now, let me end with this, everybody. Speaking of getting set free from tribalism, this is a beautiful work of art that I did. St. Paul said, I came to proclaim one thing, and that's Christ crucified. He didn't come with a conservative political agenda. He didn't come with a liberal political agenda. He didn't come with a conservative religious agenda or a liberal religious agenda. He came proclaiming one thing, and that's Christ crucified, the event of the Son of God being crucified for us, to unite the whole human race. So here's my cross. What I want you to see here is everything that we described as the right, conservative, the stability, competencies, hierarchies are good, etc. That's this vertical bar of the cross. And we can affirm that in so many ways. It roots us in good, stable values, which we need to have at every level of human life, including in the church. But the cross isn't just a vertical beam, it's a horizontal beam. And this stands for all those important values we saw in the left, in the liberal side of things. This is where the arms of Christ reach out to the disenfranchised, not just to those who deserve it justly, but to the disenfranchised, the poor, the lost, the lonely, in a preferential way. These are the arms of Christ to change and update things, to help things get better. Which bar of the cross is good? They're both good. You can't have the cross without this vertical beam that stands for a more conservative approach to life. You can't have the cross without this left beam, which stands for the more liberal bar, the liberal side of human affairs. Let's ask the grace of Christ crucified to illuminate our minds in this beautiful social doctrine of the church so that we can not only be not exasperated by the polarization that we can sometimes feel in our own communities and across the country, and even in the church, but that through the light that comes from Christ crucified, we can provide light into the practical situations in which we find ourselves today. Thanks for joining me. God bless you.